how do we use money? So we use the money to create the economic assets that would be economic engines that could support other things to grow on this island, support the intrinsic assets of the islands. And we learned about, certainly didn't learn it in my career, something called asset-based community development. And the questions of that are simple and beautiful. What do we have? What do we know? What do we love? What do we miss? And what can we do about it?
Welcome back to the Eric Ries Show. Today, I'm talking with someone whose life story feels like it spans centuries, literally. Zita Cobb grew up on Fogo Island, a remote fishing community far away from far away, where money barely existed and fish served as both food and currency. When industrial fishing came to this remote part of Canada, her father sensed something was wrong. He gave her this warning: you have to figure out how this money thing works, otherwise it will eat everything we love. And imagine hearing those words as a teenager and being sent far from the only home you'd ever known, thrust from a 19th century existence into the harsh realities of 20th century financialization. Zita took that advice farther than anyone could have imagined. She turned out to be pretty good at the money thing. She became a fiber optic tech executive and rode the telecom boom, leaving that bubble with both wealth and clarity about what markets get wrong. She eventually returned home to rebuild Fogo Island's economy on entirely different principles. In our conversation, we unpack the core question that shaped her life's work. How do you use money without letting it destroy what you value most? And we dig into the creation of the Shorefast Foundation and the now iconic Fogo Island Inn, a radical model of community-owned business designed to strengthen culture rather than extract from it. This is a conversation about dignity, intrinsic value, community, and the possibility of building an economy that serves people and place instead of the reverse. Please enjoy this conversation with Zita Cobb.
Well, Zita, thank you very much for taking the time to have this conversation.
Eric, thank you.
I find your story really quite fascinating. And, I've heard you tell it a few times now, but I thought if you wouldn't mind, we could start with your father and the advice that he gave you when you first realized you were going to have to make a trek into the wider world. Do you mind kind of picking up the story there?
Yes, I think he nudged me into the wider world a little sooner than, at least to think about it, sooner than I would have ordinarily, because I was about 10 when the inshore fishery that we were a part of collapsed as a result of the industrialization of the fishery. And I grew up as an 8th generation Fogo Islander families that were very involved in the inshore fishery. And when it collapsed, he said, when you grow up, you have to go away and you have to figure out how this money thing works, because otherwise it will eat everything we love.
This episode is brought to you by Framer. If you want to build an MVP online, the most important thing is how quickly you can go end to end from an idea to a deployed website. Most design tools are gated behind a paywall, but not Framer. With Design Pages, you get a full-featured professional design experience, including vector workflows, 3D transforms, image exporting, and more, completely free. You don't have to delegate it to an engineer or a designer or to somebody else. The fastest way to build a website is to be able to build it yourself and still have it look at the professional level customers expect. Framer unifies design, CMS, publishing into one canvas without handoffs or hassle, everything you need to design and publish in one place. It is the ultimate MVP machine. Framer already built the fastest way to publish beautiful production-ready websites, and now it's redefining how we design for the web. With the recent launch of Design Pages, a free canvas-based design tool, Framer is more than a site builder. It's a true all-in-one design platform. From social assets to campaign visuals to vectors and icons, all the way to a live site, Framer is where ideas go to live, start to finish. Ready to design, iterate, and publish all in one tool? Start creating for free at framer.com/design and use code ERIC for a free month of Framer Pro. That's framer.com/design, promo code ERIC. Framer.com/design, promo code Eric. Rules and restrictions may apply.
That's such a poignant quote that money will eat everything that we love. And I wonder if you can help, for readers that are not familiar with Fogo Island and with your story, help us set the context for what it was like. I've heard you describe it as almost like you grew up in the 19th century, like growing up in a context really without money. I feel like maybe one of the last groups of people on the world who have this kind of outsider's perspective on our hyper financialized world. So set the scene for us. What was it like to grow up in that environment, and when did money enter into your life?
I'm 67 years old, not 167 years old or 267, but I sometimes feel like I really have lived in 3 centuries, because I grew up in the 19th century on an island, as we say, far away from far away. And the island of Fogo Island is a part of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, which didn't join Canada until 1949, to give you a sense. And spent a time as an independent country with its own currency and its own stamps. And even being on Fogo Island, I don't know that we actually felt like we were part of Newfoundland either, because it was like a ship in the Atlantic, and we had lived here as people of European descent for 400 years. And money, we never talked about money. We talked about fish. Now, fish was kind of food and currency, because we were salt fish people, and we traded our fish with a merchant whose boat came at the end of the fishing season for the things we couldn't otherwise produce or hunt or fish or forage. And so there was trade, but it wasn't money. We didn't have bank accounts, and my father didn't get cash for his fish. So we understood that there was relative value of things, and we certainly understood that we didn't have a lot of negotiating power when the time came to say, what is the fish going to fetch this year? And my father, he lived in a kind of pre-banking, pre-money world. And when the inshore fishery collapsed, because the 20th century arrived and the industrialization of the fishery came, what seemed to us overnight, but it wasn't overnight. It was just making its way to us. It took practically no time at all to take just about every last fish into water as we watched this happening. And so he used to question, what kind of logic? Like, it makes no sense to fish day and night until all the fish are gone. Mm-hmm. And so he arrived at the conclusion that they must be turning the fish into money. There's no other explanation. And I think he understood for his children, and I was the second youngest, that this money thing really was going to just keep coming, and we would be victims all the time of it. And so I went away and studied business, and I figured out a few things about how this money thing works. And to my great surprise, I fell in love with business, and that I didn't expect that. And I think my career was in wave division multiplexing, the little optical components that enable the digital age. And
fiber optics, right?
Yes, exactly. And so there's the 21st century. So there you go. That's 3 centuries. And I think the centuries are going by in decades now. Mm. So maybe I've actually lived in 4 centuries at the age of 67. But I think it was, geography is everything. I think geography is the most important thing. And all of this was because of where I was born and raised.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the history of Fogo Island, and in particular how your father and the people that live there in this kind of pre-modern state, how did they conceive of it? Because this is such an interesting story to me, because we normally think of these encounters between kind of Western capitalism and indigenous tribes, or people who have a very different lineage. But here, this is not a story of colonization, or at least, the colonization already had taken place. These are settlers of European descent, but now themselves isolated from the mainstream of Canada. What was that like?
Exactly. I think when we talk about knowledge, local knowledge, cultural knowledge, indigenous knowledge comes from an enduring, lasting relationship with a place. And that happens, it doesn't happen so much in modern times, because, we somehow have fallen in love with the idea of mobility, which as just some kind of a holy grail kind of state of being, which I don't think is necessarily the holy grail. But the people that I am descended from started arriving here in the 1600s from England and Ireland, and made a living fishing in the inshore fishery fishing for cod. I need to be clear. I mean, there were other species, but really all we cared about was cod. And I mean, so much so that when we say fish, we mean cod. We don't mean anything else. If I want to say mackerel, I'll say mackerel, but I won't say mackerel. And we were sealing people because it's the northeast coast of Newfoundland. It's in the Labrador Current. And so every year, half of Greenland breaks off and comes down on top of us. And with it come 6 million seals. So we were sealing people. That was a very important food staple for us as well. And so that enduring century after century, generation after generation gives rise to a way of knowing and knowledge that, yeah, it's a settler community for sure. There were indigenous people that called the Beothic that were here on this island that came out in the summer and fished and went back into the central part of Newfoundland for the winter. And that culture has been erased from the earth through the encounters with the Europeans that arrived. You know, that is one of the great tragedies of Canada, of Newfoundland in particular.
Yeah. And I want to really understand, like, can you walk us through, like, you know, your biography is really interesting because you had this very local, very land-centered, fish-centered, cod-centered childhood, and then you entered into the world of business. Your father sent you away to learn about money. So what was that like? Like, walk us through the first steps of that. Like, where did you go, and what are the first things that you encountered, and just what was it like to be thrust all of a sudden into the 20th century?
You know, I went away once before, which wasn't a good going away. I mean,
You had a childhood illness, right? Is that right?
Yes, I had tuberculosis when I was 5, and that got discovered because the government of Newfoundland understood there was an outbreak of tuberculosis in these small coastal communities of Newfoundland. And a charity, I think it was called the Christmas Seal, they got a boat, and this boat had X-ray equipment, and it came around to all the little communities.
Wow.
And people lined up on the dock, and this was like a big deal. We didn't really know what it was all about, and they just did chest X-rays. Not all TB is in people's lungs, but that's mostly it is, and that's how it was discovered that I had tuberculosis. So I went away for a year between 5.5 and 6.5. So I had a sense of away. I was away in Newfoundland, but this away feeling, I didn't really. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing for a 5.5-year-old, 6.5-year-old. I never saw my
your family.
Entirely. I never saw them for a whole year. I mean, it was not possible for them to go there. It was really far. And also at that time, I don't think it was really well understood that how to manage TB, and the last thing they wanted was people coming to visit in TB sanatoriums.
Right.
Yeah, we're trying to control. So, and that's the other thing about these 3 centuries I've lived in. Now I've lived through 2 pandemics, because it was a pandemic. It wasn't a pandemic. It wasn't a global pandemic, but it was for Outport, Newfoundland, a very dangerous time. Anyway, but I went to Ottawa, which is the center of central Canada and the capital of Canada, because I'm the second last of 7 children. And one of my oldest brother lived in Ottawa. And so he really helped facilitate how I could ever get from Fogo Island to Ottawa, and to arrive and discover an escalator, or to discover in every room there was a light switch. I mean, we got electricity in 1971, and I left in 1975 on the 10th of July. And I turned 17 on the 16th of July. So I was super young to be starting university. And certainly my oldest brother and his family cushioned the arrival into this, how to take a bus and traffic lights and freezers. And everything was new. It's a really great thing, because I think it has continued my obsession with objects and how things work. And why do we have this? To sort of look at everything from first principles, because we didn't have all of those things, but my goodness, we still had a good life. And it's just all these things. So it was a noisy world and a busy world to arrive into, and then to arrive at a university with thousands of students. Totally overwhelming. Yeah, totally overwhelming. But sort of in a way, it was a bit like arriving in a sanatorium with a lot of kids all jammed into the same ward. It's like you just got to hold your focus. Yeah. And I think that's something that I learned I learned it, had to learn it again. Hold your focus.
What about on the educational side? Like, what was that culture clash like? Did you feel prepared to be in a university? Like, had you?
I mean, the first hurdle to overcome, and you don't hear it in my voice now, but we have a very particular regional accent here. And so it was challenging because I wasn't understood because of the accent. And it took a long time for me to realize I have to like figure out how to lose some of this accent. I was intimidated by the fact that I only had grade 11 and I was 17, and I was coming to an Ontario university where they had grade 13. And so they were 2 years older than me.
Mhm.
But what I discovered very quickly is the standard of education in Newfoundland, in this little school on an island off an island, because it's provincial standards, was every bit as good as the big province and the big university. So it didn't take me very long to realize, no, I got this material. I mean, I had calculus, going into university, and I don't think that those kids had calculus. So once I realized I was on solid academic footing, it made the rest pretty good.
And what was that like? Was education a big value in the community where you came from? Like, what
No,
accounts for that?
not at all. Not at all.
So how did you get such a good education at the primary level?
Yeah, because it was a provincial program. Education was provincially regulated. We had to write province-wide exams.
Even at Fogo Island.
Even on Fogo Island, absolutely.
Amazing.
We got a new high school and I was when it opened, I went there that year for grade 9, and it was the first high school in the province, in the whole province, that was integrated, meaning all the religions together, because we were very separated along religious lines, meaning Catholics and Protestants. I mean, there were no Jewish people or Muslim people or Buddhist people, but we were, those English-Irish histories were alive and well around Catholic Protestant lines. But the new high school got incredible teachers that came from, like some of my teachers, this was the really great thing. I had a teacher from Kenya. He was the most amazing science teacher. He changed all of us in the way we thought about the world and the creatures in it and biology. And I mean, we had a math teacher who grew up here. He was, I think, the best math teacher that ever there was. So we had great teachers, and we took it seriously. And I also think because of the collapse of the inshore fishery, like my parents couldn't read, but school suddenly became very important, which is why they pushed and shoved along with the other families to get a better high school and to put us all together so we'd have a better chance of better teachers, because they understood we were probably not going to be making a living in little boats on the North Atlantic, that they had to prepare us for the bigger world.
So what I want to really understand is what was like what was your perception of like what we would call community in a university setting or a modern setting? Like you come into this, come to Ottawa, you come into the modern world with this outsider's perspective. Like, what did you observe? Like, what was your sense of how people were living and how it was different than what you were used to?
It was super disorienting to understand, like, how do people make a living here? And where does the food come from? And I mean, Ottawa at that time probably had 500,000 people, I guess. And the idea of grocery stores and everything is in the store. So it made me a kind of automatically a systems thinker, because, and that's the obsession I have with objects. Like, how did that zucchini get here? And, it came on a truck. Well, where did it come from? And who grew it? So this constant trying to assemble an understanding of how a place works. And then how do the people there hang together? And for sure, I understood pretty quickly, okay, this is just too big a place to be a community, and the neighborhood's your community. And that works at that neighborhood scale, except that I once lived in a neighborhood that didn't have a place to get food. And so it's like, what kind of a place is this? And it was a suburb that my brother lived out in the suburb. It's like, that felt super weird not to have the things you need near. And then when I moved, as I moved on, I didn't stay very long in the suburb. Then I started to look at how neighborhoods work and when do you have to cross into another neighborhood? And then you start to understand. And I think that's the question the biggest question is, how does the part belong to the whole? And how does Fogo Island belong to the world? We didn't know how we belonged to the world, which is why we got sideswiped and the carpet sort of was pulled out from under us.
Right.
We didn't understand the world, so we couldn't understand how we were a part of it. So how does a neighborhood belong to the world? How do I belong to the world and to my family and more broadly? So I think that's the thing that is so interesting to me is all the connective tissue. And in a city, it's hard to discern how the connective tissue works.
So walk me through how you wound up in fiber optics from there.
I graduated with a business degree from Carleton University in 1979, and a friend from university and I decided, well, we really want to see this country, a giant country. I mean, I when I left home, the people from Fogo Island said, "Oh, you're going up to Canada." Because remember, we joined Canada in 1949. I was born in 1958. So people of my parents' generation had no concept of Canada. They barely had a concept of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we bought this used Ontario Hydro falling apart van and spent 6 months going to see Canada. And the van broke down just outside of Calgary. And Calgary at the time, this is 1979, was boom town. Oil and gas was absolutely booming. And, it was about to start into the big exploration in the Beaufort Sea. And so you just had to be alive to get a job. That was it. And so I started working for Texaco, which used to be called the Ugly Sister, in production accounting. And then it was such a boom town and a boom time that you could go for a walk at lunchtime and not come back to work because you got offered a different job and they wanted you to start right away. Right away meant like right now, just don't even go back after lunch. And so it was super crazy. So I moved to Shell after a short time. And then I realized I'm not going to survive here. I couldn't be inside these giant buildings in these giant systems. Although I have to say, I did love the fact that I used to do the first level close for the financial statements at Shell. And I would have to send them to The Hague. I'd be there at night sending financial statements to The Hague. That's like another part of the connective tissue. Like that, I really loved that because it helped orient how we belonged into the big Shell system. Right. But these sort of monster organizations were not. I knew I wouldn't last, and so I joined a very small tech company that was focused on cold regions engineering and cold regions design, that had been started by two men who came out of the U.S. Coast Guard, and super smart, super lovely, very technology focused people. And then I realized when I joined there, this is what I want to do. I want to support people who are making things happen. And they were really pushing the boundaries of technical knowledge around cold regions technology and what could be known with numerical modeling, because that was all really starting then, and what could be known working at model scale. They had invented a kind of a synthetic ice, so we could test icebreakers in ice conditions. And we actually had a wave testing tank in Escondido, California. And we were testing ships in wave conditions at model scale. And that became something else, because then we started testing all of the America's Cup ships, all the sailing ships. And
I remember reading about that, yeah.
Yeah, like it was it's a beautiful company. It still exists, actually. And it was like a little mini conglomerate that had offices all around North America. So I spent time in Houston, I spent time in Columbia, Maryland, and we had 2 offices in Canada. It was a super beautiful time of working in a privately held company with colleagues that were constantly solving problems for the world. So advancing our knowledge, and I really loved that. It was a decade. I loved it.
And you were on the finance side.
I was always on. Yeah, my career has always been, I will do everything that needs to be done to enable the technical people to create the enabling conditions for them to be successful. So yes, finance, yes, HR, yes, IT, yes, purchasing, like whatever the systems of support I need it to be. And then that company went through a big transition. Actually, it is a fascinating thing. The man has passed away now, but he invented, I think, the first autonomous mobile personal robot in the 80s, late 80s. And I will never, this was a great lesson, because we were taking money from our other businesses, our other businesses like the one in Houston or the one in Calgary or wherever, to keep investing in this robot development. And it really was a pioneering thing. And he was super smart guy. And making a decision to stop funding it because it just didn't look like it was going to take us all down was the hardest thing, to be in the middle of that. And I remember we would go into meetings to present it. And I remember this guy looking at this thing, and it was like tall. It was like 3 feet tall, and it could monitor its battery levels and move around the house. And when its battery was low, it would go sit on its battery. And it was like super impressive. And this man said, who was going to be a potential partner, he said, but what does it do? and then we talk about all the features. But we say, it has a built-in clock. And so he said, well, but
what is it for?
Like, I don't need a clock. But what does it? We could never answer the question. What does it do? And so realizing that it's just a demonstration of what's possible with technology, but we have to sell these things to make a living. So anyway, that was a painful time, because for close colleagues, technical colleagues that were trying to make something happen, to be in the finance seat to say, no, we just can't fund this. And we couldn't. I mean, this was before the time of venture capital wasn't a thing. I was going down to the Bank of Baltimore to explain our ever decreasing amount of cash and a growing debt, and looking at this robot and having this, well, what does it do question. Anyway, so that company, it still exists. As I said, it's changed names a few times, and but still exists, and still doing cold regions and marine technology. So, of course, the Arctic is not what the Arctic was even then. Like in my lifetime, there's less ice in the Arctic. Then I joined JDS, what was then JDS Optics, in 1989, and we were 90 people in Ottawa. And the company was founded by people who came out of Bell Northern Research. It was growing. We were a manufacturing company. We weren't a software company. We were a technology company, but not in the information. Like, we were making little optical attenuators and switches. And
it was for the physical side of the telecommunications.
Physical side. It was a manufacturing company, basically, with a lot of smart scientists. And they were engineering physicists, and wave division multiplexing was at its early days, really. And we were development people with some basic research capacity, especially in the lenses and the coating of lenses for fiber optics use. And it grew and grew and grew and grew. And then all of a sudden, of course, the telecom, I think it was mid-90s, the deregulation came. I think AT&T was broke up in the 80s, but a lot of new entrants coming in. And of course, people were starting to realize that the internet was becoming a real thing. And the build out became like relentless. And we were the bottleneck, because we were making all the little optical components. And so we...
to the telecom bubble,
we were very much up in that bubble. And so we wanted to get access to more technology than we could possibly grow ourselves. So we sold half of ourselves to a company called Furukawa Electric, a giant Japanese industrial, and that realized after a very short time that this wasn't going to work. You can't take a little tiny, nimble company in Canada and be half owned by a giant Japanese conglomerate. And, we thought we would get access to technology, but how? Just to even visit a lab takes, weeks and weeks. And so anyway, we decided to go public. We went public on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Mm-hmm. And that diluted Furukawa, of course, and gave us some money to then start to buy companies. So we started buying companies, and we were public. And I have to say, I did not like being a public company. And we kept buying companies, and the industry just it was like being swept up in a giant tsunami.
Right.
Like, honestly, I barely remember what happened between 1996 when we went public and 1999 when we emerged in one of at the time, it sounds like nothing amount of money. Now people spend that on one little building called the data center. Way more than that. It was an $18 billion merger between JDS Fitel, the Canadian company, And we were involved in passive optics, optical devices, and Uniphase Corporation based in San Jose, which was an active devices company to make JDS Uniphase. That was in 1999. And of course, we were all scrambling to build. And I signed a 2-year contract when we merged in 1999 to stay for an additional 2 years. I didn't become CFO of the merged entity. My job then was to go buy more companies. I bought like 40 companies in 2 years. And then, of course, it all came crashing down. I left in April of 2001, but it had really started to decline by the time I was finished.
You had actually very good timing, really, in retrospect.
Which, I mean, I didn't really. It was fixed. Like I gave the 2 years, and that was the 2-year point. So yes, it turned out to be good timing, but it wasn't any good guessing on my part. It's just the way the cookie crumbled.
Because people are talking about the AI bubble right now, and it reminds me a lot of the telecom bubble, because
Me too.
when I speak with students now, I always get asked, is it a transformative technology or is it an overhyped bubble? I always ask people, well, why not both? Why does it have to be one or the other? Telecom bubble was extraordinarily destructive and ludicrous, and also laid the foundation for so much of the modern world, which turned out to be very productive, even though many people involved lost a lot of money. So, just give us a bit of a sense of the rise and fall of the telecom bubble. What was it like to be on the ground floor of that?
It's like it really is like being swept up, and so it's disorienting. And I think, in hindsight, we were really not looking forward. We weren't, and with my colleagues, we often talk about this now. It's like, why did we not see that there was no business model underneath? We were an input to a systems company who was selling to the service providers, and they were all scrambling to build out, and we were a huge bottleneck. And so we were just trying to respond to, like, they want more devices, they want this, they want that. And why did we not question the business models of our customers? Why did no one see this? Because we assumed that people were willing to pay for information. We're barely ready to pay for information now, and now it's 25 years later.
Yeah.
So we didn't see it, and I consider that a failure on all of us. And there's a certain kind of frenzy of, you don't want to be the one that's left out of this. Like, you got to stay.
That going on all the time right now. Nobody wants to be left out.
That's it. If you don't stay at the crest of that wave, you're going to be swept under, and that's it. And somebody's going to win, and it's not going to be you. And you think, my God, at one point, JDS Uniphase had 40,000 employees. Like, that's an enormous responsibility, right? And companies all over the world. I remember buying a company in Germany and promising these people that their technology is going to endure and will last, and making them other promises, such as we would keep the company there, which ultimately we didn't. So I think it came with a lot of obligations that we felt, which in a private company you had more control. And I didn't enjoy being, I have to say, in something that was moving so fast, because I don't think anybody makes good decisions when things are moving so fast.
Yeah.
And why did it have to move so fast? Like, why couldn't we have collectively said, let's have a breath here? Why can't we do that now? And I don't know, it just becomes this weird zero-sum game thinking, and then everybody's making bad decisions.
Yeah,
I think that's what, during that time, I think we were all making bad decisions.
It becomes a collective delusion. I guess we're seeing that happen again now. And I think I wanted to ask you about this, because I think it's actually a really interesting contrast with what you're doing with Shorefast. Here you have an example of a very traditional corporate governance structure of a publicly traded company swept up in this mania. And people, I think, in our world now, we have this kind of like default assumption that that's good. That's efficient. That's how you create value. That's how you make profit. That's how you create shareholder value, or whatever the language we use for it. And then we kind of treat these manias and collapses and the broken promises and I can imagine what it's like to be swept up in that stuff. I've been there too. We kind of view the collateral damage of that as almost like a bug, or like a side effect But it's happening so much that it's like become the main effect. It's basically like affecting every public company that gets swept up in these things. And I'm hearing stories now about company after company or company that is just going all in for AI, all, really doing crazy stuff with their work. Someone just told me a story that they've been told. So the programmer was like, their whole division has been told there's like, they're installing monitoring software. And if 30% of your code or more is not written by AI, you're in trouble. You're going to be called in for like a performance evaluation. And it's just like, it's just wild. And this person was explaining to me, like, they feel like the emperor has no clothes, but they can't say it out loud at work because they would be, they'd be in big trouble. And I was like, well, have you considered the possibility that everyone else feels the same way and none of you can say what you actually think is going on? It's like that. We get these effects anyway. That's considered best practice to drive ourselves into these wild situations. So, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but you had this experience, you got to go through one of these bubbles, and you were one of the lucky people whose timing was such that you came out with a lot of wealth from that experience.
When I was in it, did I feel that we could have done anything different? I mean, that's the other question. I do think if we had remained a privately held company, I think we could have done more. What I learned from this, I do not trust the market. I don't trust markets in that way at all, because they will drive us in this sense of a zero-sum game, and you will lose track of what is it we're trying to do and who are we doing it for.
Yeah, what is the purpose of it?
Right. And to push the technology, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if we didn't have all this money rushing in, which, money just rushed in like crazy to build out all this infrastructure, and a lot of it was debt. And we were just building this. I mean, we didn't have that debt because we were at the bottom end of it. We were just selling little widgets into it. But of course, our customers went away, so because it was all for nothing. Now, if you look at it, 25 years later, I don't know if all that fiber is used, but probably it is. All those systems. It wasn't lit for a long time because there was no need, but now it probably is, and it takes 25 years. And maybe that's the same as what's going to happen with this. We're just, it's the combination of two things. Absolutely the scientific or technical curiosity and natural human instinct to push it to like, we could get it to do this and that and that. That's a wonderful thing. What makes it not so wonderful is when it becomes fueled by money and the seeking of as much profit as possible as soon as possible. Then we lose our footing and we're out skating on ice with no brakes. And I think and then a huge wind pushing you. So I didn't know how to make it stop then. And I'm not sure I know how to make it stop now.
Did you ever get a chance to talk about this stuff with your father?
No, he passed away before I joined JDS. He passed away when I was still working in the. Was I still in the oil patch? No, I was working for Arctech, the Cold Regions Technology Company. Yeah. So he did see me. He did see my career start in technology. He absolutely did.
Did you go back to Fogo Island during that time? Or
always for visit. Yeah, visits. Absolutely. Yeah. I've never lost touch with here. Very orienting. I never did find the heart to tell him what my salary was ever.
Right.
I did his tax return when there was a funny time that the government of Canada figured out that all these fishermen in these remote places weren't filing tax returns. And so these packages came, and I think I was 8 then. And he got this, and the postmaster was someone who could read in the community. So you got to fill this out. You got to send it in for the government. And so I took it out, and I could read, and I filled out my father's tax return. He got $800 back. It was the craziest thing because he had all these kids and the basic personal exemption, and was like, wow. Anyway,
so no income, so yeah.
So then I was doing tax returns for other people as a child.
Oh yeah, how can I get my $800 also?
Yes, everybody's like, wow, everyone's going to get money back from the government. This is a great thing. So I didn't have the heart to tell him my salary in those years. Yeah.
Yeah. But did he feel like you had fulfilled his commandment? Like, did he, was he satisfied that you had come to understand money?
Yes, he did. I think he felt very satisfied that I was not going to be swept away in the way he had been. And my mother was still living then too. When they actually moved away from the island because he'd had a heart attack and he was no longer, like fishery collapsed, and all of my brothers were in Toronto, and so my mother wanted to go where the grandkids were and the brothers were, so he moved away. It was a very bad thing for, we were talking about what it's like for me as a 16-year-old to go to Ottawa. Can you imagine him? He was in his late 60s, not being able to read, going to Toronto. I mean, we might as well have sent the man to the moon. It was like hard, really hard. Anyway, so he wasn't on the island. I think he probably, by the time he passed away, had pretty much given up that the island wasn't going to make it.
Yeah, there must have been a big population collapse with the collapse of the
fisheries. Yeah, absolutely, a huge collapse, and it was still something we struggle with. But yes, I think he felt that he had done everything he could do, and certainly his generation did a lot in what's been called now the Fogo process, which is they started a cooperative. They adapted to other species when the cod, and so they adapted to crab and shrimp. So there's been a lot of adaptation happening here. And that little co-op that they formed in the late 60s is still one of the most important fisheries in the whole province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And they export to all over the world. So, there's a success story there, but the fishery that they managed to adapt to is less labor intensive than it used to be. So fewer people needed in it, but still we are a fishing community, and that's a credit to his generation.
I think it's another fascinating part of your story is that you went back to Fogo Island after, having a level of success in the modern world that I know a lot of people who, once they have that success, they consider themselves to be kind of cosmopolitan citizens, and they want to travel the world. They want to be anywhere but where they grew up, and enjoy being part of this kind of like global elite. That would have been a very natural thing for you to do. And you must know many people who made that choice. Why did you go back to the island?
Well, when I left my career, I left in April of 2001, and I had a big rental truck that contained a little dinghy, and I drove to Florida to get aboard a boat that had been built in the previous 2 years, which I had asked to be built by a lovely company based in Bradenton, Florida, and the plan was to go sailing, which is exactly what I did. So I spent 5 years on the boat sailing, and I came out of my career, as you said, with more money than I needed for a lifetime. And I have a funny relationship with money for all the reasons that we've talked about. I don't trust it. I do not trust it. And I think we shouldn't let it land on us too much, because I think it becomes debilitating to people. And
just pick up a newspaper if you want to see evidence of this fact.
Yes. And I don't think it empowers people at all. I mean, I think I grew up at a time that people in my parents' generation had a deep sense of dignity and confidence that comes from a sense of competence and agency. They were, you would look at their lives and think, wow, that must have been hard. I mean, it wasn't easy, but they didn't suffer from anxiety.
Right.
They felt that they understood the context they were working within and that they could navigate it. They also understood, well, we're probably not going to live that long. It's okay. We're going to die. And that's just fine. And so, but there's something about money that actually people, it's a substitute for power, but it's not a substitute for competence or dignity.
No, and for the very reason that you mentioned, that it has this kind of mental illness effect on people that makes them actually like quite feeble.
Yes, and I saw that, and I see it a lot. Sailing for me was a way to kind of make sense of what this money was, not let it land on me, and to live in a way that, I tell you, sailing is a terrifying experience, and you are super focused on every single thing about that boat and that destination and that weather and what are you going to eat, and things break, and all of that was very real, and just gave me a chance to leave the world I was in fiber optics and in telecom, and during that time, I started a project. It was a radio education project in Rwanda, and it was distributing solar-powered wind-up radios to child-headed households post-genocide. It was post-AIDS epidemic and post-genocide. And that's when I started to really realize, think more deeply about community economic development, because, you go to the middle of Rwanda, most of the people I was meeting had no knowledge of the world, or very little, and that's why the radio was super important. And this was shortwave radio, so it wasn't a radio that could be taken over by bad actors who are then going to cause a genocide, because people could hear about all of the world. And kids were starting to learn other languages because you were getting Deutsche Welle, and you're getting the BBC, and you're getting whatever the French one is called. And anyway, it was just giving people. This is the sort of the thing that drives me, I think, is how do we give people in the places they live an opportunity for enough knowledge about the world that they can figure out how to participate in it themselves? How does their part belong to the whole? And so in Rwanda, I started to realize the script is being written for them by others. And that's, in many places in the global South that happens. And all of that, as they call it, globalized do-gooding, has not always led to good outcomes, certainly, but it's necessary to move money somehow from the rich world to the less rich world. But figuring out how local people actually set the table is the hard part. And so sailing, anyway, so while I was sailing, I was doing that, and home was no emergency here. We didn't have a genocide or an AIDS epidemic, but it was just slowly getting less. And I thought, well, if I know I know about business, I know how to start companies, and I really believe that we can solve problems with businesses, and this is something I can do at home. And there's not a lot I could more do in Rwanda because I didn't understand the culture, and I think we need to be very careful messing around in other people's cultures. And so at home, I'd had a scholarship program that, as one woman said, you're just paying our kids to leave. Like, can't you do something to actually create economic activity or employment here? And so that led me to home. But I have to tell you, there was a time we bought a company in China, and it was an assembly company. And I know those assembly environments because we had a lot of them in North America, and there are a lot of noxious chemicals involved. And we had clean room environments in North America. And in this case, it wasn't a clean room environment at all. In fact, the glues were barely covered in this vast open space. And we're getting a tour of this place. And I said to the fellow who was touring us around, like, people shouldn't be in this room. This is like dangerous to their health. And he said, they're country people. They don't mind.
Whoa.
And I thought, I'm a country person. It doesn't matter if you're a country person, you're a person. And so I started to realize, what this system that I am enabling and supporting through my work, what are we doing? Who is it for? It's not for these people, clearly. So that was a part of the realization that I need to do something else. And I was already on the path of doing something else, but it affirmed it. And I slowly came home, I suppose, is a way to say it. And then I became very focused on this question of, for any place, we could have gone back to that place in China, for any place, how does that place belong to the whole? And what does business have to do with that? And how can we do business differently that supports more people in more places?
It's interesting to me that you refer to the island as home throughout this whole story. Is that how you thought about it during this time, that's where home was, even though you had been living away?
Oh, yes. I mean, like, we tell, it's kind of a joke about Newfoundlanders. How can you tell the Newfoundlander in heaven? She's the one moaning and groaning. She wants to go home. We always want to go home.
Okay, so tell me about the establishment of Shorefast, and in particular, tell me about where the idea to tell everybody about the inn, and then how did the idea for the inn come about?
We started by setting up the registered charity of Canada called Shorefast, and the goal was I was working with two of my brothers in this undertaking at the time, how do we put another leg on the economy? Because we still had a fishery, which was essential, but not sufficient to the future of the island. Because not every kid coming out of the high school is going to go into the fishery. We want to give more opportunities and economic opportunities, and to do it in a way that strengthened the culture of the place and connected us into the world. So we're always back to the how do we belong to the world? And how do we give our kids a chance to be a part of the world, standing where they're standing? And like our job in the present, all of our jobs, this is always the job, is to mediate the relationship between the past and the future. And I really felt that that's what, so now I'm suddenly, what was I then when I came home? I was close to 50. I wasn't a 10-year-old. So it's 40 years later. I figured out how money works. And now my job is to help use it, because money is not a bad thing inherently, how to use it in a way that doesn't eat everything we love, but how can we use it in a way that actually turns money into fish, to reverse it. And I think at the root of any conversation about money and business is you got to start with what has value. And is there such a thing as intrinsic value? Well, I believe there's something called nature and culture, which has intrinsic value. The things that have intrinsic value are the things that, yes, support our physical and emotional and social lives, and we're meaning-seeking creatures, are part of meaning-making. And I think we live in a time that there's a lot of nihilism in this world of ours, and I don't know the cure for nihilism, but because if we have convinced ourselves that really nothing has meaning and it's all for nothing, that's a tough one. I don't know if it's true that apathy comes before nihilism, but maybe it does. Maybe apathy is a stop along the road to nihilism. And if it is, then empathy is the cure for apathy. That we know. And empathy is only possible in physical embodied form. And so how do we build communities that rest on economies? Because no economy, no community, that the fabric of the businesses that are there are built on a belief that there is such a thing as intrinsic value, and you are, as a business person, interacting, using money and interacting with intrinsic value all the time. And so are you supporting it, or are you destroying it? And so we set out with all those questions.
One of the things I think is so fascinating about this story is because you start very much from the premise that money will eat everything that you love. Was there resistance, or did you even have some fear about bringing the money economy home with you? Because I think that I'd like you to talk more about how did you set this up in such a way that you would be confident that the influx of money would be used to serve the creation of this intrinsic value in the community that you cared about, versus being yet another way to strip mine it. You think about how many cultures have been overrun with tourism, or where the ownership of the means of production, of the indigenous means of production, is now owned by private equity or other kind of extractive owners. I feel like that could easily have been the story here, and I'm sure that crossed your mind.
It still does, Eric. I think about this every day. And because it's not just that money will arrive and gobble up everything, it's also that our young people are going to fall in love with it too. It's just a dangerous element. And so how to make sure we have our steady heads and steady feet to not be seduced by it, because, an embodied kind of community life, it's a pain in a way. Like, wouldn't you like to be that fella you see on Instagram that has this, perfect life, and he can do what he wants, and he's got his private jet, and he can be anywhere, and he doesn't have to deal with the cranky aunt and all the rest of it. Like, by the time you become that guy, you don't know. It just looks so seductive. So I worry about all of that. I think the most important thing, I'm interested in ownership, because I think the most important thing is who owns something, because the people or entities that own something determine the outcomes for everybody. And so we set this up so that it would be owned by Fogo Islanders, because the charity's mandate by law is the well-being of this place. And so it's codified in that way. The businesses, we started by building an inn. An inn is inn is such a beautiful thing. An inn is a platform that welcomes people to your community and in a way that you set the table. And that's an expression of culture. And of course, that's what hospitality is. I mean, I don't think there's any such thing as corporate hospitality. I think there's only cultural hospitality. You can't separate hospitality from a place. I mean, there's such a thing as service. Service is a different thing. And there are lots of giant hospitality establishments that offer great service. That's not hospitality. And we can talk about tourism maybe separately, but when we were starting, how do we use money? So we use the money to create the economic assets that would be economic engines that could support other things to grow on this, support the intrinsic assets of the islands. And we learned about, certainly didn't learn it in my career, something called asset-based community development. And the questions of that are simple and beautiful. What do we have? What do we know? What do we love? What do we miss? And what can we do about it? And what can we do about it is, what businesses can we build? How do we build an economy around those things that makes them stronger, doesn't destroy them? And you interact with them, those assets, without destroying them.
Yeah, in a non-destructive way. So describe the inn, the vision for the inn, for those that aren't familiar with it. I think I read, did I have this right, that the inn is one of the only or one of a very few number of Michelin 3-key level, properties in all of Canada, right?
It is. It's one of two, and 3 key properties. And we got awarded it first last year, and it's some kind of secret shopper kind of thing. And we just got it again for this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes, well, thank you.
For those that don't know, for those who are not allowed to probably explain why that's such an important distinction. And again, what I'm trying to get at is once you explained it to me, this seemed very natural. I was like, oh, I see how the engines, the economic engines you're describing have created, as you say, the ability to bring economic value into the community without destroying the things that it loves. So that makes sense to me in retrospect, but the first time you explained it to me, I found it quite confusing. I was like, why, how did, you went back home and you started an inn? It's not the most obvious thing. So I want to make sure that people actually understand concretely, what is this thing that we're talking about?
Okay. So the inn, it's a beautiful building designed by a Newfoundlander, and it's infinitely look-upable. And when Todd Saunders, who's the architect, and I first started to get to know each other, we never had a contract really, but he had a very simple design brief. And the design brief was, you have to figure out how to express in contemporary architecture what we have learned in 400 years of clinging to this island. Mm. And so it needed to be a vessel that mediated the relationship between the past and the future. So because the world had moved and our way of making a living was no longer in tiny little wooden boats close to the shore, because now we fish further offshore, all that knowledge was at risk of being lost. We don't build because we don't need little wooden boats anymore. But the knowledge to build a little wooden boat is deep, local, ecological, cultural knowledge. So we commissioned a whole bunch of little boats from the older people that could still make them, and we still have those. So we got to have some examples so we don't forget. But we started a furniture building program. So we decided we were going to not just make the inn ourselves, or mostly ourselves, we were going to build all furniture. And so we invited designers from away, contemporary designers, to come. We partnered them up with local makers, and every object in the inn was conceived and made by them. So we're using local materials, local knowledge, local makers, the best of contemporary design. Because when you think about communities, they don't have design at their fingertips. Mm-hmm. Design is like a handmaiden of business, not of communities. And if you think about you don't have to go back all that far to realize that the maker and the designer used to be one and the same. And then somehow that cell divided and design became a thing, like a big thing. And the makers who live in local places all got left behind.
Yeah.
And who are the designers working for? Corporations. So the world, like corporations kind of in a way, because they're organized and they know how to work with money, and they can have all the smart people working for them and the lawyers and the accountants and communities around the world, especially small ones. I think we've been all kind of looking at this going, how did this happen? How did we get left out of the world? And so, I see the organizational unit of the world being communities that can be more effective and more coherent with a little bit of thinking about themselves as economic actors. And so, so this design process that happened, this making process, really strengthened the knowledge, its new relevance through new use. And it became a little business as well in its own right. We make furniture and we sell it now. I could sell you a chair, Eric. I'm sitting in a chair that I made. You'd love this chair. I think you should have one. And so that's a business-minded way. So to come back to the question, what's a business for? What's it doing? What problem is it solving? Who's it for? And same thing with agriculture. When I left home in the mid-70s, we were growing almost everything that we ate. We weren't having melons, but we were growing root vegetables. I don't think we knew what arugula was, but we were feeding ourselves. And then when the ferry started running every day, we were just importing everything. And as we did that, we were sending our money away, and we were disempowering ourselves. We were losing our knowledge about growing. So we thought, okay, we're an inn. We have to feed people. And so, of course, we're going to serve whatever is local, and we're going to use the inn as an engine to encourage people through commerce to grow more things again. And that has actually happened. So a business can do that. And that is the beautiful thing about hospitality. What bed are we putting you in? How are we greeting you? Every single cultural interaction in the tourism industry is an opportunity for commerce and business that supports the place and the culture that it's in. I always think about cruise ships because in some ways they're like the perfect extraction machines. They're like placeless wandering around the world, making sure we get all the money and hold it in our system. And our inn is the total opposite. It's like, how can we get the money? How can we create demand and build a business that make money go down, not suck it up?
Well, it's an example of a concept I call mission transmission, where you could I hear this from people in business all the time. I could easily have you say, well, unfortunately, we want to serve local food, but there's no longer any local agriculture. So too bad. We want to use local furniture, but sorry, it doesn't. So the market has not provided what we need. So therefore we must, you see this excuse everywhere. I wish we could use organic materials, but there's no organic supply. Or we just did a previous interview episode with Seth Goldman from who created Honest Tea, and he was talking about how when they were doing tea, there were no organic ingredients for tea, and so they could have said, well, oh, too bad, I guess we have to make it the same way everybody else. But Mission Transmission says, no, hold on, if my mission is to create this thing to accomplish this purpose, then what happens beyond my walls matters also. That's also part of the story, and to be able to use an economic engine to catalyze the things in the world you want to see is incredibly powerful. Was this in your mind when you started the inn? Like, what did you have in mind when you first started? What did you think it was going to accomplish? Because of course, since then it's become this incredible conduit, not just for economic activity, but it's such a high profile place. You get lots of celebrities and thinkers and all kinds of very cool people who would never have set foot on Fogo Island in any other circumstance. Did you have that even in mind at that time? Like, what did you think you were trying to build?
I thought we were trying to build a business and to contribute to an economy. And, Fogo Islanders suffered a lot with the loss of economy and culture. And I really wanted to remind and to get Fogo Islanders to see that what they have, what they know, has intrinsic value. Mm-hmm. And it can have market value. It's very dangerous if an apathy sets in, and if you get to cynicism, that's another stop on the road to nihilism, by the way. And if you get to cynicism, then people are like, oh, it's all messed up, and we have no power over it, and I mean, how often do you hear, oh, the only thing anybody cares about is money. What's the point of anything? Well, you make a point. And I think the best businesses, and business is the best way to prove that that intrinsic value can be supported by the market. It can be. And I could preach at you about that, or I could show you. And we were absolutely thinking that when we were starting the inn. Absolutely. And we took every single thing and said, how can we use this to support the things we know, the things we have, the things we love? Every single thing. And how do we, in a way, I don't want to say tame money, but it's a little bit tame money. So one of the things we decided super early on is the inn has no tipping. Absolutely no tipping, because we wanted there to be, and I think that's the very definition of hospitality. If there is not a level playing field between guest and host, it is not hospitality. It's not. How do you do that in a commercial establishment? It doesn't work if you're going to hand me $20 and the next person $20. Then you shouldn't trust my hospitality in that moment. And you shouldn't trust my motives. And I will feel utterly diminished, because all of the things that I know that have intrinsic value, and you came because you're interested in those things, have been reduced to a transaction. And it has, any hope we have of having a relationship has been swept away by the $20. It's an indignity to guests. It's an indignity to hosts.
Amen. Amen to that. I think that attention to detail and that kind of seeing every little thing, not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity to take the hardness of it to communicate the ethos of what it is that you're making, is something that I see in the most mission-driven companies. You see that obsession over and over again, where it's like a typical business is like trying to eradicate all difficulty, reduce decision-making to a spreadsheet, and kind of just make money by whatever means necessary. You get this kind of like lazy, sloppy default that like produces these pretty grim outcomes. And of course, the people that work there are miserable, and the ecological impacts are devastating. Like, and it always, whenever I encounter a company like that, I'm always like, what is it for? To your question, like, who is being served by this slop? And we're seeing with AI slop now, like, it's taking over everything. Like, who is it for? What is the purpose of this? Whereas in a company, and if you talk to someone who works in a company like that, say, listen, I want you to have this attention to detail. I want you to, if I pitched this idea to them, they'd be like, that just seems so much, business is already so hard. You're going to make it so much harder.
Yes, I hear that too.
Yeah, and it's like, but then they still want the outcomes. Like the reason this is such a famous place and people travel from all over the world to go there is precisely because we did the hard thing. That's what creates the opportunity. So this kind of like modern obsession with like profit without value, like easy money without doing the work, and this just like really lack of attention to detail I see everywhere. And I wanted to ask you about it in the context of what you mean by community, because I remember we were talking a few weeks ago, and you said something to me that really stuck with me. You said people don't even understand the word community anymore. I think you even said like you all drive a Subaru. That doesn't make you a community, something like that. I just thought that was like so poignant. So explain what you mean by community and why the kind of like modern idea that common interest is not sufficient.
Exactly. Proximity is essential for community. And so when I say community, I mean a community, a place. I suppose you say a place-based community. And I think we pretty well know that if there's a hell, the road to it is paved with frictionless convenience. Mm. And communities of place are not frictionless. And it's a place where people live in some kind of a tangle with each other. And entanglement with each other is a super important part of it. It would, I'm in my house on Fogo Island now. If I just lived in my house and I didn't have interactions with all the people that I am physically close to, that we wouldn't be in a community. And so a community of place is where we have a shared fate, F-A-T-E. and that it is the fate of that place. So if the ferry breaks down here tomorrow, we are all in that shared fate. And so that, and the people in a community that live together in a place, they don't have to like each other. I grew up, next to a brother of my father, who those two men didn't really like each other, but they sure leaned on each other and supported each other.
Their fates were bound together. Yes.
And that is super beautiful, because if you have a life organized just around the people you like, I think what happens is you're not experiencing a healthy friction and a healthy kind of figuring out how I belong to the whole. So you start thinking that it's all about you. And,
you're describing modern politics in a nutshell right there.
But that's a terrible thing, because if you believe it's all about you, and then you can never be happy unless, you never be happy unless you have your own way or something, as opposed to you could be happy for other people in the community, and you could be happy for the people in the future that are going to have a better life because you did something different. And so it's about embodiment, because empathy comes from embodiment. And so that's what a community is. And it's not frictionless. And, when you said earlier, when you're talking to people in business, they're like, oh God, it's already hard enough. Now we have to do all this other stuff. We have this too at the end. There are days when we kind of look at each other, oh, we do this particular thing, around a daybreak, a box at the inn. Every guest in front of the door before they wake up have a daybreak box. And it's like, that's really hard, because someone has to come in at 3 a.m. and then we have to figure out the delivery of it. And but we'll always do it, because it's a way of showing care, and we put ourselves in the place of the guest and say they'll have a gentle awakening, that you don't have to get up and get dressed or use the telephone or call because you want. It's there as our gesture for you. And then when you're ready to meet the world, we're ready. Mm-hmm. We're ready for you.
That's a great metaphor. You said that part of your goal here was not just to support this island, this place, this community, but to show a different path, a different way of business. I can't remember exactly how you put a different relationship of culture to business to money. And so talk about the Shorefast Institute and this kind of larger project that you've been engaged in to show people a different path of what our future could look like if we embrace some of these principles.
So when we started, we absolutely had this idea of intrinsic value and what's here, and to build a businesses and an economy of our true assets and all of that. And to make, this is another thing that's an aspect of it, I think is we're saying, is to make the investment, meaning money, but to make sure that all investment that we make is actually development. Because most investment is just investment. It's not development. And that's how come we got. Well, if I invest to just make money, I think most real estate investment is just made to make money. And so even though they call it real estate development,
was created.
Yeah, we got to stop letting them use that word development when it's just investment. And that's how come the financial economy got so big, or one of the reasons. It's like 5 times bigger than the real economy. Development happens in the real economy and real people's lives in real places. And so it's to take something that has an intrinsic value and use money to invest to bring it forward, make it stronger, give it a longer life, bring forward a human being's potential, or a community's potential, or a blueberry's potential in a way that doesn't rip every blueberry bush off the planet. So that's investment. I want to live in a world where all investment equals development, because money can do the things we ask it to do, tell it to do. And so anyway, we started with that. That was very much in our mind: development, community, economic development. And it was not a plan to start an institute for place-based economies. That wasn't in the beginning, but what was happening over the years, because the Inn is in its 11th year now, we also have an art program, and that art program is super important to how we belong to the world. It's a residency-based contemporary art program. And through that, artists are coming to us from around the world. Artists have a different way of knowing. It brings a different understanding of value here, and it puts us in the world in a different way that's not it's about knowledge, not just about transactions. Anyway, but as time went on and people were coming and staying at the inn, the number of times, I mean, I would say every person who's ever come will say, when I go home, I'm going to look at my home differently. I'm going to look at where I live differently. And I was in a conversation with one person who said, it's all very well and fine here because, there is a community here. Where I live, there's no community. Right. And once I got past the fact that, she didn't live on the moon, she actually lived in a place. And so I said to her, I think you could make a community, and what you need to do is is there a door in your house? And yes, there's a door. Come out the door. Doesn't matter if you turn right or left, but go to the next house, which probably has a door, and knock on that door and introduce yourself. And so you will start. That's how you make a community. And you can make one anywhere, but you have to make one. And you have to commit some amount of yourself to that. Anyway, so we were starting to get people saying, well, you come and, talk to our community. Will you do this? Will you do that? Can you write down your methodology for how this is done? And so anyway, we've been at this. That we did. There's actually a Harvard business case on some of this, by the way, called a place model. And I actually went to Harvard a few times to be with the students who were studying this case. But it's not. We really want to share it with other communities. And we did a pilot project during the COVID lockdowns with 5 other communities and started to realize, actually, there's a lot that can be shared. And it's not do what we did. Not every community can or should have an inn, but it's how we did it. It's the way of thinking about value and assets and business. And then we realized that the best way to do this is to build a network of communities and try and distill these practices so that they can be learned and shared. And really what we're trying to foster in communities everywhere is economic stewardship. And then the other thing I have to say, because it's super important to thinking, is there's an economist at the University of Chicago named Raghuram Rajan. He used to be head of the Reserve Bank of India, and he wrote a very important book that came out in 2019 called The Third Pillar. And he says this beautiful thing, which is human societies rest on 3 pillars: markets, governments, and communities. And we have steadfastly eroded those community pillars to the point of dysfunction. And nothing that we need to accomplish in this world of ours is going to be accomplished until it happens in a place. And so we need to rebuild that pillar. And as importantly, we have to figure out how to come together in some kind of collaborative musculature across these pillars. Because the things we need to get done, we need the market, we need government, and we need communities. And that's not the way we've been doing it for the last 50 years, but it's the way we need to do it.
We'll make sure to link to his work in the show notes. I realized I forgot to ask you about the economic nutrition label. So just explain what the economic nutrition label is.
So it's probably clear that we have a bit of an obsession with money and where it goes and what it can do, and inviting and causing it to do the things we know it can do to support intrinsic value. And so part of the problem with the modern economy is it's such a tangle. Most people feel it's something that happens to them, and you don't know how to shape it. And when we were starting, you could see these buy local campaigns everywhere. I mean, mostly they don't work at all. You're just nagging people. And just trying to understand, if you spent your money here, where does it go, is such an important thing. So we looked at the food nutrition labels that came in my lifetime. And most people probably wouldn't eat something without at least taking a passing glance at it to see what's in it. And so we thought, why don't we just use the same format? Because that graphic is inside of our heads and the shape is in the public domain. So we created something called an economic nutrition label. And it tells you 2 things. It tells you geographically where the money goes that you just spent on that t-shirt or that stay or that chair, that whatever. And it tells you how the money breaks down. So how much went to marketing, how much went to the people who work there, how much went to profit. It just tells you where the money goes. And so the idea of it is to have it available at the point of sale so that you can use your money to support the things that have intrinsic value, or the things that are important to you.
Right. According to your own values as the consumer.
And according to your own values, exactly. And maybe you don't care. And that's fine too. You don't have to look at it. Lots of people eat cheesies that probably shouldn't eat cheesies because you don't care. And that's fine. The information is just there. And so part of the Institute's work is we're rolling this out more broadly. And, I'm 67. Who knows how long I'll be here, but I'd love to see in my lifetime that this has really become something that people just won't buy something without seeing the label. So I tell people all the time, if you're going to buy a new sofa or something, ask the vendor for the economic nutrition label, and they probably won't have it yet. Just pull it up and show it to them and say, you really should be showing the economic nutrition label.
Yeah,
We're going to get this out now.
There's a tremendous power and leverage.
It is. Maybe, in my wildest dreams, it could be regulated, but that's probably not going to happen.
Well, people would have said that about nutrition labels if you showed them to them 50 years earlier.
That's true.
So
that's true.
What's that Ursula Le Guin quote? Something about our economic systems seem inevitable, but so do the divine right of kings.
Yes.
These things do change, but it requires people not to pre-commit to the idea that it's impossible.
Yes.
But rather to say, look, well, since we don't know what's possible, we may as well say what we believe, and
Yes.
see what happens. See where we go from there. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was the corporate structure of Shorefast, because you mentioned that it's a registered charity, but my understanding is that the companies that are overseas are for-profit companies. Is that right?
Yes. So our corporate structure is, we have a separation, as we jokingly say, of church and state, meaning that charity is called Shorefast, and it owns the building that the inn is operated in. And it owns any of our intellectual property, and it operates a number of programs, of which art is one of them. Mm-hmm. And so then it also owns a company, a standard for-profit company called Shorefast Social Enterprises, Inc. And that company operates the inn and the furniture business. We have a restaurant on the island. We have an ice cream shop, which happens to make the best ice cream in the world. And that for-profit company, SSEI or Shorefast Social Enterprises, Inc., we run it like a social business. And as I jokingly say about it, that doesn't mean it's a socialist business. It's a social business, and which means we think very broadly about what impact we're having and who's it for. And that's where decisions get made about, we're not buying lettuce from some giant food distribution company. We're buying lettuce from the man that's across the harbor. That's a social business would make that decision. And when companies ask me, which sometimes they do, they're actually thinking about, because I tell giant banks that they could be social businesses. And what does that mean? Well, for example, here's something. It means you pay people as much as you can possibly afford, not as little as you can get away with.
Right.
Just a small shift. And so that's what the world needs, right? Is small shifts in how we see things. And those are called miracles. Miracle is nothing more than a tiny little shift in how you see something. They happen every day.
Like the tiny shift in how your father saw the world once he came to understand money.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And he understood it differently.
Well, I want to say thank you, for coming on and having the conversation, and also for the work that you're doing, not just, I know, on behalf of a tiny island, as you said, far away from far away, like, a very remote spot on this planet. And yet the ideas that you pioneered there, I think, are going to have a lot of resonance in a lot of other places. And I appreciate you sharing that perspective and bringing it into the world. And hopefully for those of us who don't come from that place, we nonetheless can be inspired by your example to think about who all this is for in a different way. And
to think about value. What has value?
What has intrinsic value? Yeah.
And it's a business story, Eric. So thank you for letting me tell it to you.
You've been listening to The Eric Ries Show. The Eric Ries Show is produced by Jordan Bornstein and Kiki Garthwaite. Research by Tom White and Melanie Rehack. Visual design by Reform Collective. Title theme by DB Music. I'm your host, Eric Ries. Thanks for listening and watching. See you next time.